According to Disney, Ohana no longer means family.
Just found out that the live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch has Nani give Lilo away.
What? So Disney just butchered one of their most beloved films of all time, and the internet is absolutely losing it. The live-action Lilo and Stitch remake just hit theaters last week, and the controversy around it makes the Snow White backlash look like nothing. I'm not joking. We're talking casting backlash, removing key characters, and plot changes so strange that they feel like they're from a different movie. Disney fans aren't just annoyed, they're furious. I've literally seen videos of people walking out mid-screening and demanding refunds. But this isn't your typical "they ruined my childhood" outrage. This is something much deeper and damaging. But honestly, we should have seen this coming. Disney's live-action machine has been churning out soulless cash grabs for years now. Snow White's got buried in controversy and weird changes. The Lion King looked great but felt emotionally flat. Mulan lost all its charm trying to be serious, and Pinocchio was just really bad. One by one, these remakes have stripped away the magic that made the originals so special in the first place, but Lilo and Stitch? This one hits deeper, because unlike those fairy tale fantasies, Lilo and Stitch was never about magic kingdoms or singing princesses. It was raw, messy, and real, a story about poverty, grief, and broken families held together by love and chaos. It was one of Disney's most culturally specific, emotionally honest films, a rare piece of authentic representation that resonated with Hawaiian communities and anyone who'd ever felt like an outsider. Here's why this is super controversial, because a lot of you probably watched the movie and really enjoyed it. I mean, I watched the movie and there were a lot of parts that I really liked. But that's the issue, because if this was a standalone movie, it wouldn't have received nearly as much outrage. Well, except for that absolutely outrageous ending that would have caused backlash no matter what, which we will get to later in this video. But as a remake, it doesn't just miss the point, it completely rewrites it, and that's not even an exaggeration. The backlash got so bad that the director came out and passed all the blame to Disney, saying that the executives didn't allow him to stick to the original story. So if that doesn't tell you how serious this is, then I don't know what will. And look, I know that the internet can overreact. I know people love to dunk on remakes and shout about ruined childhoods. But what's happening here isn't just some surface level nitpicking. It's a gut level reaction to watching Disney commodify culture, strip stories of their soul, and sell back hollow imitations to those very communities the stories were meant to represent. So what exactly went wrong? In today's video, I'm gonna go over all the bizarre changes made to this movie, from the removal of certain characters to Nani giving up Lilo to Child Protective Services. I wish I was joking. So strap yourselves in and try to relax, because it just gets crazier from here. Before we dive in to the chaos that is the live-action remake, we need to take a quick moment to remember what made the original Lilo and Stitch so special, because you can't understand why people are furious now without understanding the kind of magic we lost. Wait, I have to just pause for a second, because Disney just told me that if you subscribe to this channel, they will stop making live-action remakes. Guys, I'm serious. I'm sorry, back to the video. The story of Lilo and Stitch actually starts way back in 1985 with a young Disney artist named Chris Sanders. He worked as a story artist on classics like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King before becoming head of story on Mulan. Around this time, he sketched out the first version of Stitch, which was an idea he had for a potential kids book. This early Stitch was imagined as a mischievous creature living in the forest and rejected by all the other animals. But he couldn't get the story together and ended up just abandoning the project. Flash forward to 1997, when Disney entered what some people would call their awkward phase. The company wasn't exactly dominating at the box office anymore, and they desperately needed some fresh material that they could create on a smaller budget. That's when the head of feature animation, Thomas Schumacher, asked Chris if there was anything that he wanted to develop. Chris thought back to Stitch and pitched a story about a monster crash landing in a remote forest where he'd have to interact with the local animals. But Thomas wasn't completely sold on on the idea and suggested that the monster should be meeting people instead to create a stronger emotional contrast. It was almost as if a light bulb went off in Chris's head and he locked himself in his hotel room for 3 days whilst he came up with the story. He thought back to his recent vacation in Hawaii and thought that that was the perfect location for his film to be set. Thomas ended up loving the idea and gave Chris the green light, but with one condition. The movie had to look like Chris's own art style. So Chris brought in Dean Dubois, which he worked with on Mulan, and the two of them got straight to writing. From the very start, they knew that they wanted the movie to be as authentic and real as possible, so the best way to do that was to completely immerse themselves in Hawaiian culture. It was during their research trips where they were introduced to the idea of ohana. They said that no matter where they went, their tour guide always knew someone. It felt like everyone was connected. That's when their guide explained the concept of ohana, a kind of family that goes way beyond just your blood relatives. And that one idea became the emotional foundation of the whole movie. The art team spent a lot of time in Hawaii too, painting the landscapes and trying to get a real sense of the environment. Andreas Deja, who was the supervising animator for Lilo, even visited a local school to observe how kids there actually behaved. That attention to detail carried over into the casting too. They hired real authentic Hawaiian actors to keep the characters as real as possible. Disney gave them an $80 million budget to make the movie, but they told them that they had to make it in the Florida studios. That might sound like a restriction, but to them, it was the best thing that could ever happen because it meant total creative freedom. Something that would never happen today. One of the boldest choices that they made for the movie was the decision to bring back watercolor backgrounds. Disney used watercolor a lot in its early films like Snow White, Pinocchio, and Dumbo, but dropped the technique in the mid-1940s because it was just too complicated and time-consuming. But Chris wanted that soft storybook look, and watercolor was perfect for capturing the bright, dreamy colors of Hawaii. So the background artists fully committed, training for 7 months, taking watercolor workshops, and even learnt directly from one of the original story artists on Snow White. The production as a whole was refreshingly unconventional. By the early 2000s, Disney was leaning into 3D animation, but Lilo and Stitch stuck with traditional 2D. Part of that was budget, but also because it fit with Chris's hand-drawn style. What could have been a limitation became the film's biggest strength. The characters felt real because they were literally drawn by human hands, with all the subtle imperfections and emotional nuances that came with that process. Since they were all the way in Florida making this movie, the CEO, Michael Eisner, didn't even see the film until it was complete. So it's safe to say that everyone was pretty anxious before the big screening, but surprisingly, Eisner really liked it, and he was even quoted saying, "I like it, I really can't explain it, I've never seen anything like it, but I really like it." Which is kind of the best reaction that you could hope for. When Lilo and Stitch finally premiered in 2002, audiences were obsessed. The film grossed over $273 million worldwide and raked in an extra $45 million in DVD sales. Even critics fell in love with it, and it ended up being nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. The reason all this backstory matters is because it shows how much love went into the original. They understood that setting their story in Hawaii meant taking on the responsibility of representing the people and the place authentically. They weren't treating Hawaii as some exotic backdrop or tourist destination. They wanted to tell a real story about family, community, and belonging. And the film doesn't shy away from showing the harsh realities either. Lilo and Nani are struggling financially and emotionally. Their house isn't perfect, Nani's barely holding it together, and a social worker is always just around the corner. Their family dynamic is fragile, and yet it's held together by love. So when we talk about Lilo and Stitch, we're not just talking about a fun cartoon made in the early 2000s, we're talking about a piece of art that was created with intention. A story that honored the place it was set in. That's why it stuck with people. That's why it meant something. When Disney first announced they were doing a live-action remake, the reaction wasn't excitement. It was a collective groan and then almost immediately full-blown panic. At this point, Disney fans had been through enough. We saw what Disney had been doing to its classics. The soulless, nearly shot-for-shot remake of The Lion King, the weirdly sanitized version of Mulan, the deeply confusing Pinocchio remake, and don't even get me started on Snow White. By 2023, people didn't need any more proof. We knew what a Disney live-action remake meant, and it wasn't good. So when Disney turned around and said, "Hey, we're making a live-action Lilo and Stitch," the internet collectively said, "Why?" Because out of all the movies in the Disney vault, Lilo and Stitch felt like the one that shouldn't be messed with. Not because it's beloved, but because its entire identity is so rooted in its culture, its setting, its tone, and its style. It was never built to be blown up into a mega blockbuster. People knew immediately that this was not being made out of love. It was being made because Disney saw a recognizable IP with dollar signs coming out of it. And that's where the real tension started to build, because the second that the casting announcements started to come out, the backlash was immediate. So of course we know in the original Lilo and Stitch, every part of the movie is deeply rooted in Hawaiian culture. Lilo and Nani are native Hawaiian girls living on Kauai, surrounded by the music, language, and the values of their community. But when the casting dropped in 2023, fans noticed that there was something off. The actress cast to play Nani, Sydney Agudon, had lighter skin and didn't appear to be of native Hawaiian descent. People did some digging and found out that Sydney is of Filipino, white, and Polynesian descent, but she was born and raised in Kauai, Hawaii, which did ruffle some feathers given the fact that she isn't native Hawaiian and she looks quite different from Nani's original design. When you compare this to the casting of Maya Kiloha as Lilo, this difference really stands out. Maya is native Hawaiian, and to me, I don't really think these two pass as siblings at all. I think they look very different. But listen, this whole casting debate around Disney live actions is honestly super polarizing, and it feels like everyone has a different opinion. Personally, I'm not a fan of remaking these classics in the first place, but I feel like if you're gonna do it, then at least cast someone who looks like the original. It's the same situation with the Harry Potter reboot. The moment that you cast someone who looks even slightly different from the original, there is instant backlash. It's honestly a lose-lose situation, and that's why I think these classics should just be left alone. And then there was the Stitch problem. Everyone was terrified about what live-action Stitch would look like. CGI characters in these remakes are notoriously cursed. I mean, just look at the CGI dwarves in Snow White. And people were scared that he'd be turned into a soulless, stripped of emotion ball of fur. No personality, no heart, just another Funko Pop waiting to be made. When the teaser for the movie finally came out, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I thought Stitch looked pretty amazing, and it did give me a bit of hope. Actually, majority of Disney fans were super excited about this movie. I remember seeing loads of posts of people being like, oh my gosh, is this gonna be the live action that Disney finally gets right? Well, apart from the live action Cinderella, of course, because that is perfect. But that all changed once the movie was released. Suddenly, it was clear that this wasn't just a mediocre remake. It was a complete reworking of everything that made the original so special. They sanitized the story, they removed characters, they made the most unnecessary changes that left people questioning if they even watched the original. And I know that you might think, oh, these are just silly little changes made to a kid's film, you shouldn't care this much. But what many people don't realize is that these changes actually show us the direction that Disney is heading in the future, and it's not good. So let's break down each one of these changes and buckle up, because this is where things go completely off the rails. As soon as the movie was released last week, it felt like something was off, like we were watching a version of Lilo and Stitch made in an alternate timeline. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that this wasn't just a creative reinterpretation, it was a complete rewrite. Let's start with the character changes, because this is where things really started to unravel. One of the most controversial changes was around the alien character Pleakley. In the 2002 movie, Pleakley and Jumba try to blend in with the humans by dressing in human clothes. Jumba keeps it simple with a shirt and shorts, while Pleakley goes all out, rocking a dress, a wig, and a full face of makeup as his disguise. There weren't any labels attached to him, he just chose to dress that way because that's who he is. It's as simple as that. His character was quirky, flamboyant, and fun, and those disguises became an iconic part of what made Pleakley so memorable. So tell me why in the remake they decide to strip the characters down and make them boring humans. I'm not joking. As soon as they get to Earth, they have this device that lets them transform and disguise themselves as humans. It's a complete erasure of what made them so iconic. I just don't get what the point was, because when I was watching the movie, I kept forgetting that these humans were supposed to be Jumba and Pleakley. It was just a strange choice to make. Fans were outraged, and social media quickly blew up with backlash. What makes this so interesting, however, is that the director of the film, Dean Fleischer Camp, actually responded to the backlash. Just listen listen to this.
I've had people message me, why is Bleakley not wearing the dress? And I just want to say, I tried. I tried.
That pretty much tells me everything I need to know. I can guarantee you that the director of this film had very little creative freedom when it came to making this movie. You just know that the Disney executives were behind every decision of it. I actually think this is why they hire less established directors to take on these live actions. Because when you look at Dean's credits, he hasn't done any huge productions before. Same with Thomas Kail, who is the up-and-coming director of the live-action Moana. I have a sneaky feeling that Disney chooses directors that they feel like they can mold into doing exactly what they want. But that is just a theory and probably not true at all. Moving on, speaking of the character Jumba, the remake bizarrely repositions him as the main antagonist of the story. Now, sure, in the animated film, he's technically Stitch's creator and is chasing him down, but his dynamic is layered. He's funny, he's stubborn, and eventually he softens, becoming part of the family. However, in the live action, this is all changed. His character starts off as somewhat neutral and then just turns pure evil, which is a complete 180 to how the original film goes. And here's the crazy part, because do you want to know why Jumba was changed into the villain? Because they decided to not include the original antagonist of the movie, Gantu. See, in the original version, Gantu is the main villain, with him taking over the role after Jumba fails to catch Stitch. The reason why they didn't include him in this remake was apparently because it was too difficult to bring him to live action. But I mean, you're a multi-billion-dollar company that can have unlimited budget, so how difficult is it really? So because of this, Jumba was slotted in as the main villain, and it's him who kidnaps Lilo and Stitch as he plots his own galactic domination, which just completely destroys one of the main points of the original movie. The heart of the original lies in the redemptive power of family. Stitch learns how to love and becomes good through his bond with Lilo. Jumba is meant to parallel this arc in the original film, with him being redeemed and becoming part of the family. But we get completely stripped of this redemption arc in the remake, which upset so many people. But what if I told you that this wasn't even the worst change that they made to Jumba? I know it's hard to believe, but there is something that made me even more angry than his evil ending, and that's the fact that they decided to change his accent. In the original Lilo and Stitch, David Ogden Stiers voices Jumba with a Russian accent. This, combined with his unique pattern of speech and tendency to reference himself in third person, gave Jumba an incredibly unique voice. Unfortunately, the movie gets rid of this completely when they cast Zach Galifianakis, who just does his normal American accent. He literally didn't alter his voice in the slightest. How hard is it to cast someone who can do a Russian accent? Seriously. And this is the most frustrating thing. Why are we changing these iconic and memorable parts of the movie? In the original, there's this bald, sunburnt tourist that fans called the ice cream guy. He earned the nickname because he'd always drop his ice cream in shock whenever he caught Lilo and Stitch in the middle of some wild chaos. You would think a character like this would be so easy to bring to real life. Well, apparently not, because in the live action, they changed this character into a Hawaiian man wearing a tank top and dropping a snow cone instead. I literally have no words to describe this. After watching the movie, people speculated that the change was most likely due to the fact that they cut out a lot of the anti-tourism themes of the original. In the original, there's a scene where Lilo displays a wall filled with photographs she's taken of sunburnt tourists lounging on Hawaiian beaches. At first glance, this may seem like a quirky hobby of a child's. However, this detail carries much deeper significance. In many tourist destinations, especially places like Hawaii, a lot of locals can often feel like they're on display, with their way of life being turned into a spectacle. What made Lilo's wall of tourist photos feel so powerful was that it flipped that dynamic. The film offered a layered perspective on what it means to grow up in a place that the rest of the world treats as a vacation destination. The live action completely gets rid of these anti-tourism themes and ends up feeling more like a commercial for Hawaiian resorts, which feels far-fetched, but just wait until you hear these changes. Right from the first scene, we see Lilo sneaking into a fancy resort to use the hot tub, which is something that she does a few times throughout the film. But Lilo was never a kid who would trespass on luxury property. In the original, the message was clear: the resorts were the intruders, not her. They also cut moments that hinted at how fake and performative the tourism industry can be, like when Nani said,
"Who wants to work at this stupid fakey luau anyway?"
That line was important because it called out how native Hawaiian culture was being packaged for tourists. But they clearly didn't want to include anything that could make their resort setting look bad. On top of this, there was the addition of just random new scenes that seemed to be purely put there to show off resort life. Junba and Pleakley don't camp outside like they did in the original, they stay in the resort instead. Junba literally disguises himself as a resort worker. When Stitch first arrives, he doesn't wander the streets right away like in the animated version, he crashes a resort wedding first. The original movie feels like Hawaii through the eyes of someone who actually lives there, but the live action just feels like an advertisement. It's these subtle changes that you wouldn't notice if you didn't know the original. The entire tone of the movie has been sanitized beyond recognition. In the original, Lilo is messy. She bites people, she lashes out, she's clearly grieving and doesn't know how to process it. And the film lets her be flawed. It never wraps up her sadness in a cute little bow. But in the live action, Disney tones her down completely. She's sweeter, more polite, and noticeably less violent, all to avoid any sense of bad behavior. And it's like, did they forget the point of the story? Lilo is supposed to be angry. That's what makes her healing so powerful. You can't tell a story about grief if you're afraid to show the messiness of it. That same fear of complexity shows up in the way they rewrote her dynamic with Myrtle. In the original, Lilo completely snaps on her and their fights are real and chaotic, but the remake downplays her rivalry to avoid anything that might be perceived as bullying. Even though Myrtle is literally the one that bullies her, in doing this, it removes one of the key contrasts that defined Lilo's social annihilation. Her loneliness doesn't hit as hard when there's no contrast to compare it to. Let's move on to the most controversial part of the movie, which is the ending, and stay with me here because things are about to get crazy. In the original Lilo and Stitch, Cobra Bubbles is the social worker watching over Nani and making the tough calls on whether Lilo should remain in her care. After a series of chaotic events, including Lilo's near drowning incident and the destruction of their home, Cobra decides to remove Lilo from Nani's custody. However, the situation takes a dramatic turn when Lilo is kidnapped by Captain Gantu. Thankfully, Lilo is returned home safe, and Cobra Bubbles acknowledges the unique circumstances and chooses not to separate the sisters. Instead, he supports their unconventional family, emphasizing the film's central theme: Ohana means family, and family means that no one gets left behind or forgotten. This plays out very differently in the live action, with the role of Cobra Bubbles being split into two different characters. Cobra Bubbles still exists in the film, but as a federal agent only. We meet him later in the film when he's tasked with capturing Stitch. The social worker aspect of this character now exists in the form of a new character named Mrs. Keikoa. Now, there is a very specific reason why they made this change in the film, which we will go over in just a moment. In the live action, Nani's backstory is expanded, showing she's a talented surfer with dreams of studying marine biology before her parents died. After their loss, she gave up everything to care for Lilo and avoid social services breaking them up. Throughout the movie, Mrs. Keikoa is constantly doubting whether Nani can actually take care of Lilo, which causes tension between the sisters as Nani feels like Lilo doesn't understand how serious this is. This is when Stitch comes into the picture, and at first he just makes the situation 10 times worse. He creates chaos around the house and even causes Nani to lose her job. At this point, Nani wants Stitch gone, to which Lilo replies, "Oh, you can't do that because remember what Mom and Dad said about Ohana and how nobody gets left behind." To which Nani turns around and says, and I quote, "Mom and Dad left us behind. I know that stuff sounds really nice, but you need to start living in reality." Never in a million years would Nani's character actually say this. I don't think the creators of this movie actually watched the original because it just gets worse from here. The ending starts off similar to the animated version, where Stitch is allowed to stay on Earth with Lilo. It's quite an emotional scene where Stitch does this whole monologue about how he has this newfound family and that's where he belongs. If the movie ended there, it would have been absolutely fine. But then we go back to the house where Miss Keikoa still isn't convinced Nani can take care of Lilo and urges her to consider giving up guardianship to the Hawaiian government so they can take care of her. I forgot to mention this before, but throughout this remake, Nani's neighbor Tutu, who is a new character, and her grandson David encourage her to pursue her dreams, reminding her that she had an offer to study marine biology across the country, which she turned down to look after Lilo. Suddenly, Miss Keikoa comes up with a plan that their neighbor Tutu could foster Lilo so that she wouldn't have to be that far away from home. Lilo is strangely quickly on board with this and encourages Nani to go off and study marine biology, which is just something that her character would never do. Nani shockingly ends up agreeing to this and leaves Lilo so that she can study across the country away from her. While this is painted as a feel-good moment, I cannot stress this enough how out of character this is for Nani. In the original, Nani fights with everything she has to keep them together. The message was clear: no matter how hard life gets, no one gets left behind. It was raw and it was painful. But in the live action, apparently Ohana means giving up your family to CPS. And the reason why they made sweet, caring Miss Keikoa into the social worker instead of big, scary Cobra Bubbles is because they didn't want the idea of Lilo being taken away to be scary. The director even spoke about this change in an interview, saying, "You end up thinking about how it's a very different experience to see an actual 6-year-old girl potentially being threatened with being torn away from her caregiver sister after grieving the loss of their parents." Which is so confusing, because why would you say that and then end the film with her in foster care? Like, why would you make that change in the first place if you knew how serious it was? And that's what a lot of people don't understand, because the neighbor didn't adopt Lilo, meaning the state can take her away at any time they want because Nani is no longer her legal guardian. If Nani did want to gain custody again, then it's gonna be a really hard battle through the courts to get those rights back. The foster care system is and always will be such a touchy subject. Whilst it's necessary and can be good at times, there are so many people who have had bad experiences with it, and it just seems like such a sensitive topic to put in a kids movie. If you wanted an ending where everyone got what they want, then why couldn't they just have Nani go to college in Hawaii? Because if the creators did any research at all, then they would discover that college tuition for marine biology is free for native Hawaiians. Or maybe if they were going for the whole second family route, then they could both have stayed with the neighbor and she could have helped take care of Lilo. I could think of at least 5 different outcomes right now that wouldn't have a Nani giving up custody of Lilo. I just don't get it, because the ending was right there in the original. Why did they need to change it? Disney keeps doing this, remaking classics under the guise of bringing them to a new generation, but stripping them of the very risks, textures, and rough edges that made them so special in the first place. They try so hard to make them modern and progressive, but they end up just feeling super out of touch and backwards instead. There is an obvious pattern now, and this movie is the clearest proof yet. It looks like Lilo and Stitch, but it doesn't feel like it. The heart, the rawness, the weirdness, it's all been glossed over into something safer, prettier, and sadly emptier. And here's the frustrating thing, because despite everything I said in this video, there were moments I really enjoyed of the movie. I laughed, I cried my eyes out, and I was really touched by a lot of the scenes. If you're the average viewer and you don't know much about the original, then I really think you'll love this movie. I mean, if it was a standalone film, it would have been really different. But if you know the story, like really know it, then you'll feel what's missing, and it hurts. Why I find it so frustrating is that I could see the golden age of Disney was still in there, and I know they're more than capable of bringing that back. This movie really showed that to me, and I hope after all this backlash that they start actually listening to their fans, because this was definitely a lot of people's breaking point. This remake is more than just a missed opportunity. It's a reminder of what we lose when we try to repackage the past instead of preserving what made it matter. Not every story needs a reboot or a live action, because the moment we turn these stories into products, we forget why they actually mattered in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen this movie and what you thought of it in the comments. I'm so curious to hear everyone's opinions. And if you made it this far, comment the word honey so I know who the real ones are. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for all the support recently. Words can't even express how grateful I am, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!